Hello, welcome to a new video about TMS web core for Visual Studio Code. In this video, this is the second video about project management. We are going to talk about the renaming units and forms and so on. So you can see the effects that those renames have on the project files. Okay, so this project this has been enabled for as a Git repository, so we can see the changes that will be performed on those files. So what I'm going to do now is to create a new unit, okay, inside this project. It's named as unit 2, and I'm going to rename it here by I don't know, let's see, main unit. Okay, one of the things that you have to check is that the unit name here inside the source code has been also updated accordingly. So if you rename a .pas file, the name of the unit inside the file will be also changed. Okay, but this is a valid identifier. So what happens if I rename this? For example, this is not a valid identifier. Okay, so what the plugin is doing is telling you that has changed that identifier in order to remove all the characters that are not valid. And you can see here there is a warning that tells you what is going on, because it could be a bit confusing because this is not the name that you were using for the file. But just remark that on Pascal the file names should be valid identifiers, because that identifier should be used inside the file. Okay, so this is for valid and not valid identifiers, so this is covered. So now what we are going to see how to rename a form, in this case unit pass. It works exactly the same, but for example if I change this to, I don't know, 130, okay, it's not only changed the .pas file but also the HTML and DFM. Okay, and also of course the unit name. And if we check about the changes here, okay, here we will see what happens on the dproj, that the unit name has changed properly to unit 130, and this is the file that I was including on the previous step. And it's the same for if I use a not valid identifier. If I use spaces or any other character that is not valid, if I make that change, I get the warning and I get that identifier fixed properly. And also on the dproj, if I check about the changes, okay, I get the right one because that is the right name. The same happens with the dpr, in which I get the right identifiers, and everything works as expected. So this is just to remark that this is an Explorer-like tool, but it's also a project manager. So you can actually copy and paste files and so on. This is what the functionality that comes with Visual Studio Code, but also is integrated with a project manager. So the project files, which are these two files, are updated accordingly. But for example, what happens if I try, for example, to rename this file to, well, first I'm going to rename this unit back to unit 1, okay? And now what I'm going to do, sorry, I'm going to do it here. I'm going to do here is to, okay, what I'm going to do is to try to rename this unit to the same unit, okay? As you can see, at this moment, the Explorer is telling us that it's not possible. But what I'm going to do is on this subfolder, I'm going to move this unit into this subfolder. Okay, move. Also, just remark that this is also reflected on the dpr. This is taken into account, so I can freely move files between my folders, and the dpr and the dproj will be updated properly. Okay. But now it's expected that the Explorer is going to allow me to rename this to unit1.pas because it's in a different subfolder. So I try to make that change, okay, but the plugin will detect that a scenario, which is not possible on the same project. You cannot have two units with the same name, and will rename to an available unit name. In this case, is adding a 1 to the name I wanted to use. Okay, so, and also again the dproj and the dpr are taking that scenario into account. Okay, so I'm going now to create a new web form here. Okay, so it's shown here. This is unit.pass, and every unit which is a form has the unit and the form. Okay, but those names cannot collide. For example, if I want to rename the form 2, which is on unit 2 pass, to form 1, for example, okay, I will get the error that the project already contains a form with that name, so I cannot make that change. Okay, I need to use a free name. Okay, form 3, for example, that works. Okay, but if I want to change that name also to unit 1, I will get the same error because I cannot use a name of an existing unit on the project. Okay, those scenarios are also covered, and this follows the same principles on Rad Studio. Okay. Okay, that works exactly the same with data modules and so on. So now we are going to see how the save as operations work. So for that, I'm going just to discard all these changes here. Okay, and then just to discard all these changes here. Okay, so I just recover the project clean, so we can see the effect of the changes. And I'm going to create a new web form, which is unit 2. Okay, if I instead renaming that file, I'm going to use the save as command here to save this as I don't know, main form, for example. Okay, what I get here is that it's not only save the pass file, but also the HTML and the DFM, and the previous unit remains here. But if I check the changes on the dproj, okay, what I get is here is the main form. Okay, this didn't exist before, so I'm not getting the unit 2 pass and also main form pass. I mean, this is a bit complex to explain, but my goal with this video is to let you know that all the operations that you are used to do with Rad Studio in the project manager are going to work the same, and the consistency of the dproj and the dpr is going to be kept. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that, even if you don't have like a specific project manager. And the same works if I try, for example, to save unit 1.pass, and I try to use a non-valid identifier. Okay, again, it's the same as a renaming operation. I get this identifier fixed, and all the changes on the dproj are properly taken into account. Okay, so also what I can do is to try, for example, this unit. I'm going to use unit pass. Okay, these are the ones that are inside the. I'm going also to restore this. I'm going to discard all the changes. I'm going just to open unit pass. Okay, I'm going to show it on the designer. I'm going to use this view side by side so you can see the effects of making a change on the name. So if I change the name here to unit 10, for example, okay, it changes not only the source code but also the designer knows about that change, and it reflects the new name. And I'm going also here to create a new web form here, which is in this case is unit 1 pass, because that name was free. And what I'm going to do is to save this unit 1 pass. I'm going to close the designer. I'm going to save as inside a subfolder as a unit 10 pass. Okay. So it's the same scenario. I'm getting a warning that the unit 10 was already used and has been renamed to an available name. Okay, so there is no collision on the identifiers being used, and if I get the dproj, it's always getting the consistency I'm looking for. Okay, so again, this is a bit, there are many operations and many casuistics on these kind of operations. So my goal with the video is that you feel comfortable with the way you are going to work. In the same way you can work on RapidStudio. Okay, thank you.